Today I have for you a rare treat. I used to cover G.K. Chesterton on this channel all the time. Now we return to him for the first time, possibly this year. I might be wrong about that, but he went from a very regular subject on Sundays to a pretty rare one. Today we have a couple of very short articles he wrote for New York Magazine. I think it was New York Magazine. Or it might be something that is now defunct. Either way, the first is on the worship of humanity. The second is on the sort of worship of youth. I think you'll see how these are connected. And I think they're an interesting subject for our time, partially because things are now nearly a century later, much worse than Chesterton could have possibly imagined. At least I would hope he couldn't imagine this. We've seen the fulfillment of the worship of man, even brought into the church in its forms of worship, in the admission of those who designed our modes of worship that are man-focused. We have now a focus on youth and a focus on the elderly, and we see how those are a contradiction to this worship of man that we have all around us in the culture today. So here's G.K. Chesterton in two very short pieces to explain all of this for you. Anti-Human Humanity by G.K. Chesterton, originally published in the New York American in September of 1932. I would not lightly venture to intervene in the great controversy between humanism and humanitarianism. It is enough that most people know that humanism, in the sense of the faith in culture and classic tradition preached by Professor Babbitt and Professor Moore, is altogether opposed to what it would call the idealism or idolatry of humanity. In that other sense, for instance, Comte had seriously and even ceremoniously proposed humanity should worship humanity. It attracted more attention when I was a boy than it does now. But even when I was a boy, I thought humanity would be a confusing sort of god. I thought of the gods of the East who have several heads and tried to imagine one with 100 million heads, without much success. And even then, it seemed to me rather check to worship this complicated person, and then complain of the complexity of the Trinity. But it is not of that I speak specially here. There is a minor aspect of this business, about the sufficiency of mankind for men, which does puzzle me very much. I cannot understand why those who believe that man is enough for men are so sulky and unsympathetic about all the instincts and traditions of men. If I had no gods, if I thought man the highest thing in nature, I should naturally attempt to hold him up rather high. If I thought all religions were the dreams of man, I should at least insist that he was a jolly good dreamer. If I thought all creeds were myths made by man, I should at least congratulate him as a literary colleague on having made up some uncommonly good yarns. Having taken away the glory from all demons and divine beings, I should at least see that the glory was duly given to human beings. The old question ran, is religion from man or from God? If it is really from man, it is only fair to credit him with something like the creative powers of a god. But the anthropologists have no admiration for anthropists. The folklorists have no sympathy with ordinary folks. The men who write evolutionary histories of humanity seem to have taken quite a dislike to human beings. They delight in tracing a custom to the meanest motive, a myth to the basest appetite, a flight of fancy to the most stony and impossible stupidity. For instance, even if I did not believe in a future life myself, I should still be interested in that daring mystic who first dreamed of future lives. I should feel as impressive that long transformation scene of the protean soul, as foreshadowed by the Druids or the Egyptians. Immortality, even if it were imaginary, would still be imaginative. I turn to the book of humanitarian history, and I find something incredible. I find the writers actually maintaining that primitive men were so idiotic that they did not know when a man was dead, and only left food in his grave under the idea that he would soon begin to wake up and call for breakfast. As it is obvious he would soon begin to rot into worms and maggots, and there were far less possibility of disguising it than there is now. I wonder how long the idiot Homo sapiens was supposed to remain in this more than scriptural innocence. They write nonsense of that sort because they would rather write anything than credit humanity with human intelligence. And these are the people who want us to worship human intelligence, because nothing higher in the world. I do not understand it at all. After having heard Chesterton's take on the social sciences, essentially, and those who are so educated to have educated themselves into a form of stupidity. Here is Chesterton's take on old things and people who are old, and you might see how the two are connected. It always puzzles me that the slogans and sweeping statements of the hour are so often in flat contradiction of what is actually happening at that minute by clock. Men get used to seeing one thing in their daily paper and another thing in their daily life. Thus, for some little time past, we have heard nothing but slogans about youth. That this is the age of youth, that the world now looks to youth. The old must make room for youth, and so on. Well, of course, in one sense, we all set our hopes upon youth, and in that sense, every age has been an age of youth. But many ages were rather more so than this one. This was true in a practical sense, at least, of the Middle Ages or the Renaissance, of the days when Juliet was in the very heart of high romance at the age of 14, or when Richard of Gloucester was a great captain taking the field at the age of 16. Passing over these, we might certainly say that the end of the 18th century was an age of youth, when Pitt had come to be prime minister when he had barely come of age, when Jackson and Lafayette went to battle as mere boys, when men like Danton and Desmoulins filled Europe with their fame and died about 30. But today it is not only untrue, except in the very largest and vaguest sense, but there is a very particular and even peculiar truth pointing the other way. In one practical respect, that is emphatically the age of old men. An extraordinary number of old men are working when young men are not working. It is not mainly the fault of the young man. There may be something in the impression that more young men, not young women, are showing lassitude as well as laxity. Their morals and manners used to be traced to the war. They were shocking because they had been shocked, that is, shell-shocked. But most of those young men are now not so young as they were, and anyhow, the merely lax are a minority. The new generation suffers not from the horrors of the war, but from the horrors of peace. It is not the war, but the slump, and they are not at all unemployable, but only unemployed. The fact remains that the work of the world is being largely done by old men who have not lost their jobs, and not by the young men who cannot even get any jobs to lose. It will be truer to say that this is the age of active and animated grandfathers. I myself know, in my own personal circle, an amazing number of cases in which grandfathers are supporting a whole patriarchal clan of descendants and dependents. Perhaps we should demand legislation against senile labor, as in the agitation against child labor. I do not say it is a good thing, nor that it is anyone's fault if it is a bad thing. I only say it is a fact, and therefore the most fashionable cry of the moment is a flat contradiction of the fact. Taken from the New York American, September 1934. Much of that attitude that he speaks in that second piece, about this being the age of youth, first, given that was issued 91 years ago, should give us a little bit of pause, because we hear the same thing all the time, including the same complaints. I would think most people would say the youth today are shell-shocked from war, unless we speak of cultural war. That's another subject for another time. There has been a pervasive attitude, going back, who knows, perhaps to the garden, of the young having contempt for the old. I don't need to illustrate some of the names people get called today. It is worth reminding ourselves that we are, all those of us who are young will eventually not be young and have those, whatever there are equivalent of those names leveled at us too. As for the question of humanism and the worship of humanity, I think you see those two linked easily together. The worship of youth is essentially a worship of humanity in its vibrancy and in its youngness. But it's always the aged who remind us of the folly of worshiping man. Man grows old. Man's works fail, and eventually man's own body fails. And then he stands in judgment before the God-man. Curious what you think of this, so let me know in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.